And it's 4 a.m. and I'm sitting there, and that's when I realized there is something standing directly over me, directly above me, big giant shadow. And it was just moving back and forth. That's the only reason I noticed it, because it was gently rocking back and forth, and it was big. And I'm sitting underneath it. I turn my phone on. My phone makes this little beep beep sound as it turns on. And I don't really know what my plan was, because I had to still unzip the tent and crawl out there. I didn't have a plan, but I turned my phone on, and right when it made that sound, this thing just goes poof, and it was gone.
Just to get us started, tell me how you got involved in all this. What happened?
It all started for me the summer before this last summer. It was actually springtime, and I found this deer in my neighborhood that had been brutally slaughtered in the weirdest way. And it really kind of tripped me out. I found it at 11 o'clock at night, and it had been killed in this, where its front legs had been ripped clean off, and something had ripped it wide open and took its lungs, kidneys, heart, every organ out of it. The only thing left inside this deer was its stomach sac, its bile sac. And so whatever did this to this deer didn't rupture that sac. And it was laying in my neighbor's yard at 11 o'clock at night. And I don't live in a wilderness, I live in a housing development with highways and towns and in every direction. And I'm on the edge of the Columbia River Gorge, so there's wilderness not far away, but where I live is a housing development. And so this deer was killed in this really weird way. I've never heard of anybody seeing bears or cougars in my neighborhood. Occasionally a coyote will be spotted, but I can't imagine a coyote did this to this deer. And so it really kind of tripped me out and just kind of set me out of curiosity researching Sasquatch and, dog man and all the stuff that YouTube could feed me, and the algorithm just keeps feeding you and feeding you. You know how it goes.
Right.
And so it was about a month later, and I was up in the mountains near the coast, near the Columbia River bar, where the Columbia River, the mouth of the Columbia, enters the Pacific. And this is about a 3-hour drive from my house. So a totally different region than where this really weird slaughtered deer was at. But I definitely had Sasquatch on my mind, like heavily on my mind. And at this point, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if I believed in it or not. I'd seen a lot of stuff on TV. I was open-minded to it, but a part of me was like, no, it's just nonsense. It's just misidentifications and hoaxes and things like that. A giant gorilla man couldn't survive in the woods without someone capturing it or killing it, all those kind of thoughts. And then I climb up to this viewpoint to look out into this valley, because I was mining for agates and crystals. So I've been working for hours, and I was by myself running power tools and breaking into these rocks. It's just sort of a hobby of mine. And I look into this lower valley, and I immediately see something. And I chuckled to myself, saying, that's funny. That looks like a Sasquatch right there. Not thinking it was one, thinking shadow, stump, something. And I'm staring at this thing, and then I see that it's walking. I see legs. I see arms swinging. And I was just like dumbfounded, just beside myself, like, what am I looking at? It was a ways away. I'm up on a mountaintop, and this is down in the lower valley. And I just couldn't even believe my eyes, like kind of questioning my sanity. It was a really weird moment.
Didn't look anything like a person.
Well, I mean, it had 2 legs and arms, but I never even for a second even suspected it was a person, to be honest with you, just by how it was all one color, dark. It's in an area that's damn near impossible to get in and out of. But I'll have to admit, at that time, I didn't realize how hard it was to get in and out of this valley. I've since became very familiarized with the nightmare of getting in and out of this valley. But I mean, it was upright, 2 legs and arms. So I guess you could say it was shaped like a person, but I never even suspected it was a person. It's like as soon as I saw it walking and moving, the only thing I thought of was,
yeah,
that's a Sasquatch. And I remember staring at it and saying to myself, are you effing kidding me? These things are real. It was just a really weird moment. And so as I was staring at it, I kind of, was shocked and awe and kind of beside myself. And then I get to realizing, I need to get footage of this thing. And so I'm tapping my pockets, and I had rocks in all my pockets, and I didn't have my phone on me. I could see my truck. I knew my phone was in my truck. And so I'm staring at it, debating, do I get the phone or do I just stare at this thing? And so I decide, nobody's going to believe this if I don't get footage of this thing. So I fly down this cliff and get to my truck and scramble back up this dirt embankment and get up there. And when I first got to the top, I couldn't find it for a second and was just kind of sickened to myself. But then I spotted it. And so I pull out my phone and I start recording. It's a video on my channel, and it's not a good video. It's really far away, but you can see in that video how I'm incredibly out of breath when I'm zooming in on it. I'm just huffing and puffing. And I filmed this thing for almost an hour that first day, but the clouds were really thick that day, and they kept coming in and blocking my shot. And so then I'd wait for them to drop, and then I'd film some more. And so I believe my first video I ever put up of this is 18 minutes of just really poor quality footage of a little black blob down in the valley bottom. But so after a while of staring at this thing, and it just stayed in one spot once I started filming it. And the clouds would come in and block my shot. And then eventually they got so thick I couldn't see it anymore, and I had to leave. I'd been up there all day. And so I had to just go and just call it a day. And then I got back and met up with my family and was telling them about it. And, they're looking at me like maybe it was a bear, or, are you sure it was this? Are you sure it was that? And I was pretty confident in what I saw. And so the next day, we all went back up there. And it was a clear, beautiful day the following day. And I go right up to the spot, and I look down, and I realize there's a big stump right there, and right where the creature was at. And I didn't know there was a stump there because all I could see was the creature's body. And then it was very clear the following day to see that there was a stump there. And so I think it's possible, one of two things. Somehow it knew that I was filming it, and so it just froze and refused to move, as a lot of people will say they do. But I think it was probably digging in that stump for grubs. And I've been kind of looking into this a lot. I think grubs out of the rotted wood is a major part of their diet up there. And I'm working on a video right now to sort of corroborate that.
Okay.
And so at that moment, I was, showing, I had my dad and my kids and my wife up there and just showing them everything. They believed me, but obviously there's always some kind of room for maybe I missaw what I saw. And it bugged me that my footage was of poor quality. And so I knew that I was just going to go hard with trying to prove this thing. And that's what I did. I started buying gear right away, started buying better equipment, and immediately started going out there by myself, doing what I could to search the area. And right away, I started finding things, X structures that were very strange. And I had seen enough other people's work to know what they were, immediately upon seeing these X structures. And I think it's important to illustrate, I'm very familiar with trees in forests. I own and operate a tree service. I've worked for Department of Natural Resources doing tree thinning, tree planting. I did several years of wildland firefighting. So I know trees and behaviors of trees, and I know Mother Nature. And so, it's annoying when certain non-believers will kind of look at some of the things that I've shown and try to brush it off as Mother Nature, because I'm pretty good at recognizing what Mother Nature will and won't do when it comes to trees.
Right.
And so right off the bat, I'm finding these structures that are really weird. And yeah, some of them debatably could be natural, but just very weird to say that they happen naturally. So I felt pretty optimistic that I was really on some good ground. And then I'm following this canyon system. There's a lot of rivers that run through this wilderness area, and this area is all logging territory. A lot of private property up there owned by logging corporations, and then a lot of property owned by the federal government and stuff like that. It's not a national park, it's a pretty private place. And so I was deep in one of these canyons with my dog, and I found just a phenomenal footprint. And this area was so far from any gravel road or any beaten path. I had to follow a river, and I took this little game trail. And following this river is a lot of work because you're walking knee deep in the creek to get anywhere. And then off of the river, I found a game trail, and I was going up that game trail and found a footprint with a clear ankle, clear toe print. It wasn't huge, but it was probably like a size 12. And once I found that footprint with everything else, that was a really good moment for me. It really got me excited. And I was like, realized that this is a good area to be doing this in.
Yeah. Do you happen to know, were you able to tell like how fresh of a track it was?
I can't guarantee how many days it had been there, really. It was summertime, so we hadn't had crazy monsoons coming through.
Yeah.
But, I would guess that it had only been there for anywhere from a few hours to a few days.
Okay.
I don't know any more than that, because it was pretty clear. And I have it on my YouTube channel. I have that. There's a short that shows that footprint. It's actually one of the first shorts I ever put on there. And since that day, I've found a lot of footprints, but this was early on, really got me pumped. And so at that point, and actually on that same day, there was a weird experience where something was paralleling me in this canyon, because at a certain point I got out of the river and I was just walking through the trees. It's really weird, really loud whistle. Not like a bird. It was just creepy. And everywhere I went, this whistle would be blasted. And I don't know if it was being whistled at me or if it was being whistled down the canyon to warn of my approach or whatnot, but just really strange. And on that same trip, I got to this place where there was a big cluster of, I believe they were Doug fir, big mature Doug firs. And they were all pushed together in this teepee-like stance that was really strange. They were still growing in the ground, so it wasn't really like a structure. It was actual trees that were all just pushed together in this seemingly unnatural way. And that's when I really started looking at the trees and started noticing right away this anomaly that exists in there of trees missing their tops. And like right now, I'm surrounded by trees where I live. Big, healthy conifer trees, evergreen trees, very, very rarely lose their top. Lightning is one of the only things that'll top a tree. And in this area, you are literally stepping over the tops of big, healthy trees as you walk through the forest constantly. I've made a lot of videos about this. So I just started noticing that all these trees have been topped, and I mean everywhere. In the bottoms of the canyons, up on the tops of the hills, it's everywhere you go. Top, 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 top. And I think I've actually figured out why they're doing that, but I'll get to that later on. But it was just this weird mystery, you know, everywhere I went, these trees were topped. And the top of a tree is very flexible.
Yeah.
You know, designed to take wind. Trees typically break off and fail at the ground. Either the roots pop or the tree breaks down low where it's way more rigid. The upper portion of the tree, that's the youngest, most flexible part. It's a very weird place for big, healthy green trees to be breaking naturally. You know, it just doesn't happen. And so I was seeing that in amounts that were just mind-blowing. And so I would get back up to that mountain where I had the sighting, and I was always looking down, trying to figure out how to get to that actual area where he was at, where it was at. And eventually I figured it out. I bought a nice e-bike, and I took a bunch of gravel roads that connect to this, and I could go over the gates, and I got into that valley. I had to get off the bike, and I had to walk up this river. And so I'm deep, deep in the middle of nowhere, and I'm approaching the valley where the creature was at from that first sighting. And I look up to my left, and I see this big, huge root ball up in the air, a big, big log stabbed into the ground, and its roots are up in the air. And I immediately knew what that was. I'd seen, you know, enough stuff to know about the upside down tree phenomenon. And I know a lot of people try to say loggers do that. I've looked into this so much, and if you talk to any old school, old timer logger, they've never done that. They've never put snag. It's called snags. But nowadays, for some reason, in the last decade, the Department of Natural Resources has been having people put trees in the ground upside down with the roots up in the air. They call it snags, and they say it's for habitat. It's really weird that they're doing that they're having people do that.
What habitat does it create?
They say it's for certain birds that want to burrow into the logs. So I have a guy who has installed snags, and I actually want to do a video with him because he looked at the stuff. So when I went up to inspect this upside down tree, I found, or initially I think I found about 10 of them in there. And some of them are big, some of them are small, some of them don't have roots, some of them are just logs impaled into the earth. And so I showed this guy about my upside down trees, and he was like, yeah, we would never install snags that look like that. And he showed me pictures of what his snags look like. And I think, and this is just the conspiracy theorist inside of me, but I think the Department of Natural Resources started having people install these snags simply so there was a way to discredit the upside down trees that people are finding. Because their theory is that they put them in upside down because it creates dead trees that birds can burrow in, and there's some other weird reasons that they do it. It's total nonsense because, like, why put it in upside down, for one? I mean, you could just dig a hole and stick a log in it. It makes no sense that they have them put them in upside down.
Yeah.
And it really is just totally counterproductive. There's no benefit. I've had so many people tell me, oh, upside down trees that's loggers so they can mark their boundary lines. Like, no, it's not. Loggers have GPS in their hand. Loggers have tape. They have markers. They have paint. They have all kinds of things. They wouldn't spend all that diesel fuel and time burying a freaking tree upside down as a mark. I mean, it's just nonsense. But I mean, I get it. It's a really weird phenomenon, and people find them all the time. And so, I have a lot to say about all that because I recently found a whole bunch of new upside down trees, and I'm working on proving my theory on why they're doing all that. But Well, hopefully we can get into that later. So as I went up and found all these upside down trees, this was very early on in my research. And it was at that moment, that I knew, okay, this is it. This area has so much going on. And where these upside down trees were at is only probably, as the crow flies, a few hundred yards, maybe 500 yards or so from where my sighting was at. Oh, because the sighting was up in this valley that's up above where these upside down trees are. And there's a big canyon wall right there that keeps me from getting into that valley, but not far at all. I mean, 500, maybe 800 yards, right up the way from it. And so these canyon bottoms became a huge focus for me. And right away, I start finding massive amounts of trees. They're old stumps and old logs that have just been shredded to pieces for looking for grubs. And I know that bears eat grubs too, but it's everywhere I'm going. I see evidence of grub hunting, and the berries in this area, it's just so plentiful. From spring till fall, there's so many different varieties of berries. And I have footage of salmon runs coming through there where you can look into these small pools and there'll be 20, 30 big, 10, 12, 15-pound salmon and steelhead running through there. So this area it has everything that a Sasquatch could ever want food-wise. So I started getting up there as much as I could, as much as I could afford. I have a wife, I have kids, I have a business, so it's hard to get up there. But I was up there camping with a buddy, and I went to bed. My son was with us too. My son was 9 at the time. And we're asleep, and I wake up around 4 a.m., and I had decorated my campsite with sort of like weird lights and like lasers and just all this weird stuff just to make my camp something that a creature like a Sasquatch had never seen before.
Yeah.
And this campsite was deep in the trees because I had to actually use chainsaws and clear an old overgrown logging road, which was a big project, just so I could get in and camp in this section of the forest where nobody had camped maybe ever. I wanted to be in an area where the wildlife wasn't used to seeing people.
Yeah.
And so that was my campsite, all decorated up like a low budget rave. And it's 4 a.m.-ish, and I'm sitting there, and that's when I realized there is something standing directly over me, directly above me, big giant shadow. And it was just moving back and forth. That's the only reason I noticed it, because it was gently rocking back and forth. And it was big. And I'm sitting underneath it, and I turn my phone on. My phone makes this little beep beep sound as it turns on. And I don't really know what my plan was, because I had to still unzip the tent and crawl out there. I didn't have a plan, but I turned my phone on, or my camera on. And right when it made that sound, this thing just goes poof, and it was gone. Just silent as can be, and just gone. The shadow flashed off my tent. And so I sat there kind of uneasy, not sure what I should do. And eventually I just fell back asleep. I had my son in there, and I had my dog in there too. My dog didn't wake up. She didn't alert to anything.
Huh.
And then when I got up that morning around 7:30 or whatever it was, my buddy was sleeping in his vehicle. And he gets out of his vehicle and he says to me, "What were you doing last night? Were you playing with your night vision or something? Why were you all over my vehicle, looking in the windows?" And I said I wasn't. I didn't come out of the tent. After we went to bed, I never came out of the tent. And so whatever I saw standing right above me, right by my tent, was also all over his vehicle looking in the windows, and he thought it was me. And so that was really, really pretty close contact. This thing was just within a few feet of me, and silent as can be. And that's probably the closest I've ever been to one, because there's another time when Actually, I need to jump back because I forgot about the first time I had a vocalization experience. It's kind of important to tell that story because it ties into this next one. So there's a canyon that I've given the name Dead Canyon. I name everything because I don't know the real names of anything up there. And I call it Dead Canyon because I had a game camera down there for a year. And the amount of life in this thriving, beautiful canyon it's just nothing goes in there. No coyotes, no raccoons, no porcupines, no herds of elk, no bears. And I'm getting all those animals. No bobcats, no cougars. I mean, I have game cameras all over my research area. And for some reason, this particular canyon just seems to be off limits to the wildlife.
Weird.
And yeah, it's really weird. And my buddy and I found a big slaughtered bull elk in that canyon bottom. And I brought the skull home, big rack on the skull and everything. I made a video all about that. And it was after we found this slaughtered skeleton of a dead bull elk that I got that game camera footage. And that's when I realized, nothing is going in this canyon, but yet something, slaughtered this elk. So I named it Dead Canyon after that. And, but prior to all that, the first time I entered this canyon, I didn't know anything about it. I was just climbing down a different section of canyon, and it's a gnarly climb to get there, gnarly climb out of there. And I'm down in the bottom. I had my dog with me, and we just explored around this, really beautiful canyon with just amazing swimming holes and deposits of giant agates that are unlike anything you've ever seen. I'm talking agates bigger than basketballs, 100-pound, 200-pound agates. I've recently hiked out one that was 80 pounds. I've never seen anything like it. Just giant agates all over in the bottom because nobody's ever in there. So nobody ever picks these up and takes them out. And so I'm down there exploring the canyon, real eerie kind of feeling the whole time. And at the end of the day, I'm working my way out of this canyon with my dog, and something screams from the bottom of that canyon. This sound just blasts up the trees at us. Just this crazy sound. I can't really even emulate it, but it sounds like a piece of heavy equipment or machinery, the way that it comes across. And it's like kind of like a jackhammer, but different, kind of like a giant piece of equipment, diesel engine failing to start. It's sort of like this repetitive, but it's just a really weird sound. And it came so loud and so intense. And my dog and I hear this sound, and my dog kind of cowers and looks all frightened looking at me. And it came from directly where we were just out, just like right in the heart of where we had just been exploring that canyon too. So whatever made that sound had moved right in behind us. And it's like they were letting me know. I don't know what they were telling me, but letting me know they were there, or maybe telling me don't come in there. I don't know. I've been back many times. And so that sound, that was the first time I'd ever heard that sound. And then you jump forward many months later, and I'm in my camp. I'd been up all night, sitting in this hunting blind that I bought. That it's kind of cool. You can see out of it when you're in it, but if you just take a few steps away from it, it just looks like a camouflage tent. So I will sit in that thing on a swivel chair, and it gives you a total concealed 360-degree view of everything, but nothing can see you. And so I was in that all night, sitting there drinking coffee, and the sun came up around 6:30 in the morning. And on this particular trip, I was out there all alone. I've done a lot of all alone multi-night missions out there. And so the sun was coming up, and I just didn't feel good. Been drinking coffee all night, and so I got in bed around 6:37, and it was a few hours later, and I was into just dead sleep. That sound blast into my tent, and I was sleeping with an earplug. One earplug in one ear, and then I put my non-earplug ear into the pillow. That way I can get to sleep while the birds are chirping and screaming. And so this sound hits my tent. It wakes me up, and I'm kind of delusional at this point. I'd only been asleep a few hours, and I'm thinking that I'm hearing machinery, logging equipment. And I'm just thinking, damn, they're logging that close to camp. And I kind of lay there and fall back asleep, and then it hits the tent again, wakes me up. And I'm still thinking, like, wow, that's machinery. Why are they so close to my camp? And then the third time that thing hits my tent, I jump out of that bed and I'm on my feet. And that's when I realized, like, that's not logging, because I knew there's no logging going on anywhere near my campsite. I'm not going to camp where I hear people running saws and equipment. Once I realized that's that freaking sound. And I bust out of the tent, looking all over the place. And I mean, that sound, it's hard to say how close that thing was when it was making that sound, because I had that one earplug in and I'm in my sleeping bag. But then I realized that this big red apple that was about 6 feet maybe from my tent, it was sitting there, and I had a game camera aimed directly at it, and the apple was gone. And I'm thinking, okay, I got that. It's on the trail cam. And I go to the trail cam and I get the chip out and put it in the reader. And I start watching and flicking through. And there's the apple. And then the apple's just gone. No explanation for it. Wow. None whatsoever. And I had put fruit in front of trail cams many times. And I would come back to the fruit and it'd be gone. But there'd be no picture. Well, every now and then there'd be a picture of like a crow taking a tangerine or something like that. But so many times I would come back and the fruit would just be gone and there'd be nothing to explain it. But this time it happened so close to me. I mean, it happened just feet from me while I was sleeping.
Yeah.
And, at this point in my research, I was pretty dismissive of the whole cloaking thing, that people have talked about. It's just too weird, too abnormal for me to get behind. But then this happens to me. And so I really had to, okay, there might be something to this cloaking thing, as weird as it is how, no matter how hard to believe it is, there seems to be something with an ability to come in and remove that right in front of a trail cam. And this is a new trail cam, not a super high-end one, but a good trail cam. And when I put another apple in place of that one, I got footage of a crow that came in and took that next apple. So, somebody says, oh, it could have been a bird and it just was too small. No. I mean, you get a butterfly that flies by and that trail cam captures it. There's nothing that can come take that apple in front of that trail cam and not get photographed. Well, nothing besides the Sasquatch. And so that was kind of my first introduction to just how weird, these things potentially are. And I have since captured on a trail cam this blob of light moving through the trees in broad daylight. And I got 3 or 4 shots of this blob of light moving through the trees. It's on one of my videos on my channel. And that was, I'd heard a lot of stories about the lights that people attribute to Sasquatch and stuff like that. And so I didn't really know, where I stood on all that. But then that happened right there on my trail cam. And the weirdest thing is that this light was on a nice, clear, sunny day about midday. Now, if you take a nice, bright lantern and you go out in the sunny, bright day, you can barely even tell that lantern is on.
Right.
Because the sunlight, just overpowers it. So whatever this blob of white light moving through the trees in broad daylight is, I mean, it was bright enough to be completely visible in daylight and move enough and have enough mass or whatever you want to call it to trigger the motion detector on my camera. And that in itself is just crazy. That would mean that this thing in the pitch dark of night would have been a very bright, glowing blob of light. And also, while the trail cam's going click, 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 and capturing this thing moving through the trees, in one of the shots, there is a clear thing on the ground. Like, it's almost like the shape of a footprint. I don't know what it is. But so I really suspect that in some way, shape, or form, it was them, whether it's them cloaked or whatever. I don't know specifically, but it was put in an area. I have names for everything, like I said, and this is an area that I call Tree Break Alley because it's just this entire section of my research area where Tree Break Alley is a gravel road that goes through there a couple miles. It's just inundated with tree breaks and top trees and in the arches. The arches is a major thing that I guess we'll get into next because there's a lot of weird stuff surrounding. Oh, well, I should have brought up the arches before I brought up this trail cam, I guess, because so these arches are just that. They're big 100-foot trees that are bent into these arches. And I only focus on conifer trees, although there are a lot of deciduous trees that are very strange out there. But deciduous trees are the leafy trees. Conifers are the evergreen trees, the timber trees. And the reason why I primarily focus on the conifers is because those trees grow very predictable, very, with uniformity. They don't twist and do weird stuff like the leafy trees will. They all grow straight up with the perfect form. So when you start finding conifer trees that are bent into arches and doing weird stuff, something's going on because they don't do that. They're a very predictable tree. And I started finding, big conifer trees sideways, wedged and hooked in massive amounts of scraping and manipulation and literally carving and gouging to get these trees to hold these forms. And I have video footage of all of this stuff. My YouTube channel is Northwest Yeti Quest, and it's just NW Yeti Quest. You can find it on YouTube. And I have a lot of videos about the arches and the X structures and all that kind of stuff. But once I started focusing on these arches, just finding them just so fascinating that they just shouldn't be there. And it's not just, okay, a tree falls over, another one lands on another one, and they end up sideways. These things are completely and totally bent and hooked and captured by neighboring trees. And I've even watched over time how I'll find one that's partially arched, make a video about it, come back months later and see that it has been moved. And there's even times where I can see where they had to actually really move it way off to the side, bring it down and get it underneath branches and nubs. And there's all this scarring and all this evidence of work, of mass energy put into these things. These things take time and dedication to create. And so I started focusing on these arches. And then, as I've mentioned, rock hunting is kind of important to me up there. So a friend of mine who's a geologist, he wanted to come up there and do some rock hunting with me. And I said, okay, but I warned him that my main focus up there is Sasquatch stuff, but I was going to take him to one of the canyon bottoms and we were going to fill up some backpacks with agates. And as we're driving through, I spotted a bunch of new activity. So I told him, hey, I got to pull over, man. I got to go check this out. And he's fine with it. And so I'm down at this new arch and I'm filming it and just blown away by this arch. And that's when he's like, hey, man, what's this? And he picks up this big, huge pine cone. And I'm kind of looking at him like, why the hell are you fascinated by a pine cone? When I'm showing you this. And he's like, no, you don't understand. This is a certain kind of tree. This pine cone doesn't grow in this forest. He's a scientist. He's a smart guy, and explained to me, this is not from here. This pine cone is every bit as weird as your arch, and it's right here underneath your arch. And so I'm like, looking at the pine cone, come and think of it, like, yeah, I've never seen a pine cone like that in any of these forests. And so we took that pine cone, and it was just kind of weird, something I had to think about. But then a month or so later, I'm camping up there with my son, and this is actually the same trip where I had the Sasquatch standing right outside my tent. And my son and I are in the woods, and we're looking at some art, and I'm filming it and talking about the art. And my son goes, "Hey, Dad, what's this?" And I turn around, and I'm just like, "Oh, no way. It's another one of those pine cones." But this one was carefully stabbed into the ground. It wasn't just laying there like the one that the geologist found. This one was intentionally stuck in the mud, like stabbed into the mud, and right at the base of this arch, just like the other one. And so I was careful to collect this one without touching it. And there's looks to be teeth marks in it, which, would make sense if that tree, so it's a subalpine species of tree, and its real name is Abies something. It's a subalpine tree. It needs 4,000 or higher elevation. In my entire research area is barely 2,000 or less. I'm very coastal, so it's all low elevation. There's little to no snow there. You'll go multiple winters without any accumulation in my research area of snow. And so a subalpine tree just could not survive in that region. It needs very cold weather and very high elevation. And so these pine cones appearing in this forest beneath these structures is very, very weird. And so at that point, I really started looking at the arches thinking, there's something special about these things. There's something important to these things. I don't know what. I can only speculate, because initially I thought, oh, they must just use these as ramps to get up into the canopy. Because I've come to believe that Sasquatch spend a lot more time in the trees than other researchers really touch on, because that's what the evidence is showing me in my research area, because just the abundance of top trees, and I'm talking trees topped 80, 90, 100 feet high, snapped clean off, as big around as a foot, 15 inches wide, just snapped clean off. The force and strength needed to do that is just mind-blowing, because for one thing, they got to hold on to that tree somehow. And at the same time, they have to break a freaking log in half. I mean, it just makes no sense. It's insane. So anyway, these arches became an important focal point. And so I found this section where there was two big, amazing arches right by each other. And so I set up 2 trail cams underneath these arches. And that's where that one trail cam, it captured a ball of light moving through the trees, the one that I was just talking about. But then as time went on, it captured another really weird anomaly of strange beams of light that are very weird. There's like 6 or 7 pictures of these beams just flying through the trees, almost as if like a super bright spotlight or something was up high and hitting the forest, and then the trees broke it up and made it shatter and go off in all these different directions. But it's just really weird beams of light. And then as time went on, I got another series of pictures of a bipedal figure standing there, and it's almost like a translucent humanoid shaped figure. And then there's 3 pictures of it where it just barely moves. And then there's 4 more pictures and it's just gone, but it steps forward. And then there's this blob of darkness, this mass of darkness where you can't see really what's going on, but there's enough movement going on in this blob of darkness to make it take a bunch of pictures. And, some people have said, oh, that's just moisture on the lens of your camera. And maybe it is, but I've looked at a lot of trail cam footage. I know what moisture on the lens of your camera looks like. This seems something different to me. But I don't know for sure what it is, but I know that the first 3 pictures look like a semi-translucent humanoid shaped thing, and then it just vanishes. And then there's 4 more pictures of, like I said, just this sort of blob of darkness. Those trail cams underneath those arches got me 3 pretty interesting pictures.
Yeah.
And I've had some trail cam footage get me some other kind of weird stuff as well. Like on one trail cam in broad daylight, also, there's these 2 glowing red dots deep in the forest. And that's all you can see is these 2, and it almost looks like they're peeking around a tree, but real inconclusive. I don't know for sure what that is. And I have another trail cam footage thing of it looks like the shoulder potentially of a big bodied humanoid Sasquatch looking thing, but it's deep in the trees and you can just partially see something that shouldn't be there. Nothing super conclusive, but at one point I had 17 trail cams set up. Right now I probably have, 10. A lot of them probably need new batteries. It's a lot of work maintaining trail cams scattered across this wilderness. And, it hasn't been super productive. I've gotten a lot of wildlife and other things.
Have you set out any audio recorders?
I just recently started working with this guy who's really big into audio. And he's taken me up in some of his locations up in the Columbia River Gorge. And so I bought 2 Tascam recorders, and I've just been kind of playing with them. I haven't got into that yet, but that's my next step, is to get audio recorders set up in there, because I want to get some good audio. Because I've heard howls and screams at night, but never actually recorded any, because they're always deep, deep into the canyons, and I can just hear them off in the distance. So I really want to get some good audio, and I know that I will get some good audio. I'm not good with tech, so it's every time I step into this new thing, I'm a very slow learner, and it's always hard for me.
I just wanted to ask you about the pine cone thing real quick. You mentioned what tree it comes from, and it needs that elevation and everything. Have you looked on the map and tried to figure out where like the closest place is that maybe it could have come from?
Yeah, I've absolutely. And the most closest location is somewhere near Mount Rainier or Mount Hood. Because where I'm at, it's kind of equal distance to either mountain, because it needs to be a real high elevation place to support this tree. And interestingly, I have found more of these cones since this incident. And that was very recent. On this last trip, I found a couple. And that took me for a loop, because I'm like, okay, I've been overreacting about these pine cones. Like there must be a tree, or, and so it was kind of a weird thing when I found them. And so I've been geeking out on researching these trees since I got home from that last mission. And what I found out even more solidifies my belief that these are being brought there. Because, okay, for one, these pine cones don't fall off of their trees. These pine cones disintegrate on the tree and fall apart, and the seed is spread in the wind that way. So you shouldn't ever find one of these on the ground, even if you're in one of those high elevation places. And the more I've read up on these, the more I've learned that, yeah, they would not survive. They would not thrive. All of the trees in the region that I'm doing this research in are all timber trees planted by logging companies. There's occasionally a volunteer that spreads from something or another, but there's no high elevation area where a subalpine tree could accidentally plant other ones, because there's just no way around. There's no way the wind could carry their seed, 100 and 200 miles, whatever it is. And finding out that these pine cones should not ever be found on the ground, that they fall apart on the tree, and that they thrive at 6,000 feet, that they want very cold, very high elevation, which my research area doesn't offer. And it's so I have a theory that the Sasquatch migrate from a different region during the winter, and they come to my research area. And why wouldn't they? The mushrooms, the fish, the game, there's so much food there. And it doesn't matter what time of year, they can go down to the Columbia River shoreline, and you can fill buckets with freshwater clams. They're not good eating, but the food in this area and the climate in this area is just so perfect for Sasquatch. So I suspect that these certain clans or groups, they migrate in from their high elevation, and they bring these pine cones. And maybe because every pine cone I've found, the first two were underneath these arches, and then now I have found one at the base of a big tree break. Well, actually, we found three at the base of this big tree break, and one of them was very old, looked like it'd been there a long time, and then one of them looked like it was very brand new, and then the other one looked like, I don't know, it'd been there a while. So then I found another tree break where there were two of these subalpine cones just laying side by side on the ground. And so I don't know for sure anything, but I speculate that it's some kind of calling card.
Yeah.
As they come in, they're leaving them on the ground next to these structures, next to these things, to tell probably the resident Sasquatch, hey, we're here, and who knows? Other people have said, no, those are gifts. They're bringing you just to show you that you're on the right track and what have you. And I don't know. I don't know for sure, but I do suspect the gifting thing is a possibility, because recently it's crazy, because it was my 1 year anniversary to the day of my sighting, and it was the day before Father's Day. And my wife wanted to know what I want to do for Father's Day. I said, I'm going Sasquatching. I don't care. It's my 1 year anniversary. And so she was like, okay, well, it's Father's Day, so I guess the kids are coming. We're all coming. I said, okay, it is what it is. So we're all up there, and I'm driving around making videos and looking at signs and doing what I do. And I see something in the middle of the gravel road, and I'm like, honey, what the hell is that? She's like, how the hell would I know what that is? I get out of the truck and I run over, and it is a ball of hair so big that I thought it was a freaking wig laying in the middle of the gravel road. And it's huge. And I have samples at the NCSU with Professor Darby right now, and I've sent samples here and there trying to get some kind of conclusive thing on this, but it's a huge blob of Sasquatch hair. And it was just such a crazy coincidence, man. Like 1 year to the day, and there it is in the road, right on Tree Break Alley, right on one of my main thoroughfares of my research I do, and I scooped it up, and there's been a lot of really weird coincidences of things that have happened up there. I've been deep in certain areas, and there'll be just a big old pretty agate sitting on a log. And obviously, if these creatures are watching me, they've seen me picking up agates and putting them in my backpack. And I had a rock throwing incident too. I forgot to mention that was pretty early on in all this, when I talked about that first side of the upside down trees, and eventually a beaver comes in there and starts killing off a bunch of trees and opens up this wall of foliage that's gone. And then I'm tromping through the creek, and I see all this opened up. I see the beaver dams been built, and then I spot a whole nother patch of logs impaled into the ground like freaking lawn darts. And so that's when I realized that upside down tree site is a lot bigger than I ever thought. And I was down there it was in December. I remember it was winter and cold. And I was just down there probing around, making videos, talking about Sasquatch stuff. And all of a sudden I hear a rock go bing, 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 go bouncing by. And it rock on rock because I was walking across the shoreline on top of River Rock. And I didn't make a big deal about it because I was making a video and I didn't want it to seem staged, while I'm filming. But I acknowledged it while I was making this video. And then later on, another rock went bing, bing, bouncing by. And so there was a third one. 3 rocks came flying out of nowhere and were bouncing right by me. They weren't like aggressive. I wasn't even the least bit like threatened by it. It was more like I was being teased, being played with or something. But that was, like I said, that was real early on. And I did have kind of a major accident, major event that happened to me up there where I got ran over by a logger in a truck. And
what?
I was on my e-bike and I was getting up into this area that's really hard to get to. And some guy coming home in his work truck doing Mach 8 just whipped around the corner. He slammed on his brakes. He couldn't stop. Hits me, sucks me under his truck. Then he just grabs reverse and reverses with me and my bike underneath his truck, drags me another 10 feet. And long story short, he had to drive me out of there, take me to an ambulance. And so I left that area in a pretty bad way. And it took me out of the game for a minute, 14 stitches across my knee. And both legs were pretty trashed. I could barely walk. I was on crutches and all that. But strangely, had that not happened, because I went to this place called Ocean Shores. It's a little beach community in Washington State. I own a piece of property there. And I was pretty battered and injured. And we all just kind of went there for like a laid back little beach trip. We were staying at a hotel and just wanted to go check out the property and all that. And we walked down from my property to where the beach is, and we're going out in the sand, and I'm on, I had one crutch I was using, and I was in a bad way, but I brought my spotting scope that attaches to my cell phone, and it actually makes a pretty darn good camera. It just doesn't have any anti-shake, but it allows me to get good footage from damn near a mile away. In Ocean Shores, this particular peninsula has had a lot of Sasquatch sightings and stuff like that over the years. And I didn't know anything about that when I bought the property. I learned about all that later on as I got into the subject. And I'm sitting there and I'm spot scoping across this swamp into this wildlife sanctuary over there. And I zoom in on something and I'm like, what the hell is that? And my daughter was nearby, and this is a video on my channel called Bigfoot Beach Walkers. Yeah, Bigfoot Beach Walk. And I'm like, hey, come look at this. What do you think this is? And she looks at it. She goes, that looks 100% like a Sasquatch. And I'm just staring at this thing, just like dumbfounded. Like, what the hell is it? But what's weird is the whole time it doesn't move. It's just completely fixed still. And I'm zooming in on this thing. And around this same time period, as I'm discovering this, people were getting ready to start walking back, and I was so slow that they wanted me to get going. Like, you need to go because you take forever to walk. And I'm staring at this thing like, what the hell? So I start walking. I take like 15 steps, and then I zoom back, and I say, no. And there was a log that I wanted to use to try to balance the spotting scope and get a more clear, more stabilized shot.
Yeah.
And I thought the thing was gone because I zoom in on it and I can't find it anywhere. It's like, oh shit, it's gone. But then when I got home and I looked at the footage, because my phone screen is all cracked because it was on me when I got ran over, I put in the computer and looked at it a lot more clear. Thing was there, and it had either moved into a different spot, or because I took those 10 or 15 steps, it was lining up and blending with the background of this stump, so I couldn't tell it was there. But just a really weird kind of freak thing. But it looks, I mean, you see the big shoulder, you see the conical head, you see the no neck, the chest. I mean, it's crazy. It looks like a Sasquatch. But I wasn't there on mission to hunt Sasquatch or anything. It was just like a freak, accident to even capture that footage.
Yeah.
And had I not been ran over, that would have never happened. I mean, I don't even know if we would have went to the beach. I don't know what we would have been doing. It totally kind of rerouted my whole life at that time period. But that was quite a while ago that this happened, and I've always wanted to go back there and refilm that area and confirm that whatever is in that picture isn't still there. If it is some kind of abnormal blob that just happens to look exactly like a Sasquatch, then it'll still be there.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure it's going to be gone when I get there, and I need to do a follow-up video on that video.
It's just crazy. Like, for people that listen to this and are paying attention to what you're saying, it's just interesting that, like, those pine cones, I'm not trying to just harp on the pine cones, but you're finding the pine cones next to structures or potential believed to be structures, however you want to word it. You're not just finding the pine cones in the middle of a road somewhere. You're not just finding them all over the place.
No, not at all.
And the game cameras that you set up on those arches, you were talking about, like, some people say, well, it's moisture on the lens or whatever, but it just happens to be that you've gotten, like, multiple strange anomalies on those cameras in particular.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's only one of those two cameras that has captured all of it. And it's an old, cheap game camera. It's an old, shitty one that I got off of Marketplace. And I bought two of them. They were super cheap. And I was like, yeah, I'll buy these. And it's just ironically, that's the one that's captured those three things. And I have a nice, more high-end one right next to it. It's pointed in a different direction, but it's not captured anything. And so, yeah, it's just weird.
Yeah.
Because that's why it's all photographs. Most of my trail cams are on the mode where they take video. They capture 5 seconds of video or whatever it is. But this particular model only does pictures.
That's something kind of interesting, because you would think if it was just a random thing like moisture on the lens, okay, that might happen one time, but you're not going to get like 3 different instances and then from the same camera.
Oh, yeah. Well, and so just to clarify, the moisture on the lens, so in that particular picture that I'm talking about, it's definitely not moisture that creates what looks like a bipedal figure.
Yeah.
But as it steps forward, it disappears.
Right.
And it disappears into this black mass. And that is what people have said is moisture on the lens, but nobody's tried to say that the figure is. It's really weird, really, really kind of eerie, creepy looking picture. On my most recent trip, because I just got back from 4 nights up there.
Yeah, I was waiting on you to get back so we could have this conversation.
Yeah, well, I was supposed to go do 2 nights. So I was supposed to be gone for 6 nights, but I probably told you that we had to cancel that trip. We were going to go follow in the footsteps of those 2 researchers that died last December. So that got put off and I'm glad, because the storm that has just hammered this area has been insane. It would have been so miserable up there. But so on this last 4 nights up in my research area, I couldn't believe what we have found. So I've talked about the arches, right? And so on a trip this past summer, I found an area where there was something like 5 arches all in one area, and in an area that I hadn't spent a lot of time in. So I was kind of new to this section of my research area, and I'm looking up and there's 5 arches, but 2 of these 5 aren't all the way formed. So I know that over time they're going to get more manipulated, and there will be. But what there is there was remnants of multiple broken arches. And that's something I forgot to talk about a little bit too, is occasionally I will find arches that seem to have exploded, because they're bending these huge trees in this very unnatural way. So sometimes they explode on them. And so in this site, there was 5 arches, 3 of which were fully formed, and there were 2 that were on their way to being formed, and then a whole bunch of evidence of ones that had blown up. And so I'm like, this area is special. I need to get trail cams in here. And so I put one of those cheap trail cams in that area. And that's what, on this last trip, I take my buddy in there he's up from Mexico visiting specifically to do this trip with me. Well, and other things. But so we get in there and I'm showing him these arches and I'm looking for places to put the trail cam. And I noticed that one of those arches was actually broken. And that's another kind of thing that I've watched is a lot of times I'll find an arch that's pretty amazing and I'll talk about it. And then I'll come back months later and that arch will be broke off, and they don't break that easy. Trees don't break. Trees are so strong. So that shows me that they are either jumping on them or springing on them or playing on them or something. I don't know why they're breaking them, especially some of these ones would have been a lot of work. But so my buddy Colin and I are in here looking at these arches, and I noticed that the ones broke, and I'm working on getting game cameras set up, and he spots this tree, and he's just blown away by this tree. He calls it a braided tree. And what it is 2 conifer trees, 2 timber trees, it's one tree that gets topped a long, long time ago, then it turns into 2. And so they both grow up and then they're twisted in a spiral. And these are, as big around as, I don't know, my thigh, big as round as a coffee can. Pretty thick trees, completely twisted and twisted and twisted. Now, I've spent a lot of time in the woods throughout my life, and I've never seen conifer trees that spiral and twist like this. It was crazy. I've seen trees similar to that when I was in like Thailand or Costa Rica or something like that, where you're in those crazy jungles with just super bizarre tree behaviors. But I've never seen a conifer tree do this before. And so Colin, who he apparently had read about this or knew a little bit about these braided trees, he kept calling them, and he was blown away by it. I was blown away by it. And then we keep prodding around and we find 2 more in this. And these are all within maybe less than an acre of forest, 3 different trees spiraled together. It would take so much effort for me to recreate that, to bend and manipulate these trees in a way which they grow and spiral like this. And 2 of the 3 were dead trees. And I think they died because they'd been choking each other out by spiraling like this, And this manipulation of trees is everywhere, because I've talked about the topping of trees. So what I've noticed, and I've made many, many, notices of this on videos I make, is they will top a tree and it will turn into 2 tops. And then those 2 tops start growing, and 10 years later, 2 big healthy tops, then they'll come in and then they'll break both those tops. And so these trees are being played with just like a person who's manipulating their bonsai tree does. You break them and they grow 2 and they do all this, but on a scale that is just mind-blowingly impossible and very hard to believe for a person that's not familiar with Sasquatch stuff. I mean, it'd be so hard for me to show pictures of these to a non-believer and convince them that a giant hairy man thing is out here doing this to the trees. But I know tree behavior so well that trees will not do this without some type of manipulation. Lightning's the only thing that tops trees. And when I'm finding these trees that have been topped repeatedly, as tops grow, it takes years for those new tops to get big and hardy, and they get broke off again. That would mean that lightning is singling out these trees and hitting them over and over and over again over the decades. And not just one, I'm talking 1,000 trees that have been topped. And so the tops of these trees are all over the forest floor. And I've made videos about this. When you're walking through, you're just like treetop, 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 another treetop, another treetop. And when you look up, the trees are so tall that a lot of the times you can't tell which ones are top because it's so high up. A lot of times you can, but very commonly you can't even tell which of the two is top because the canopy is so far high above you. Well, now on this last research mission, these treetops that are all over the ground are getting picked up and getting stabbed into the ground. And we found, I mean, some of these were huge, huge logs impaled into the earth, just like the upside down tree site. You know, that the upside down tree site I've talked about is very hard to get to. And in fact, when I got ran over, I was on my way trying to get to the upside down tree site. And I've had many, many, many things happen to me. It's like as if some force is trying to keep me from getting to the upside down trees. It's very frustrating. But now I'm just so stoked because they have came into the Tree Break Alley area and made, I don't even know how many upside down trees now. I mean, Colin and I were just finding them. And I want to clarify, so they're not always an upside down tree. There's not always a big root ball up in the air. A lot of times it's just a big chunk of log that is just stabbed into the ground like a lawn dart. And then a lot of times they're not even that big. They're just kind of like 6 inches wide, but a big old limb or a big old treetop stabbed into the ground. And so I have really been thinking about why would they do this? You know, everybody says, oh, they're markers, or oh, they're meeting places, or oh, they're this and oh, they're that. I don't think that's what they're doing it for at all. I think it's something much, much simpler. They're taking these broken treetops that they broke off because that's young wood. Young wood is going to rot a lot quicker than old hardy wood. So they take the treetops, they broke and dropped them down, and here it is early fall, because they're already there. It's definitely fall, but these have been in the ground. Some of these look like they've been in the ground for quite a while by the looks of the pine cone and leaf all around them. So they're stabbing them into the ground. They're going to sit in the mud and they're going to rot all year long. And then in the springtime, bugs are going to land on them and they're going to do what they do. And these are all going to fill with grubs. And they can just walk through and they can pull these out of the ground, break them off, and they got grubs galore. And I really think that's all it is. When all the upside down trees that people blame on loggers and, you know, claim they're this and claim they're that, I think it's much simpler. It's just about food. That's all it is they want grubs to get in there and they want them to rot. And it's just by stabbing them into the ground, they're just leaving little things behind that they can come back later and pull a snack out of. And I was, you know, proffering this theory to my buddy that was up there with me. And he was like, yeah, you know, that makes sense, makes plenty of sense. And so we found what was like an old chunk of branch or log or treetop or something that was stuck in the ground. This was over in Dead Canyon. And we're filming while I did all this, and we broke it, ripped it off, opened up the inside of it, and sure enough, tons of little bugs all crawling around in there. And that's not even like the right season. In the springtime is when the grubs get big and fat. And I think that's probably when they do most of their feeding on grubs is in the spring. But that test proved that they can break those whenever they want. And there's some kind of bugs in there. Now, I don't know if those bugs will be there all winter. I'm not sure what they do in the winter, but it just showed like, yeah, that would work. And something else that was pretty amazing on this last trip that we found, we were on the farthest I've ever been downstream from Dead Canyon. We were on ground I've never been on before. And we come to the shoreline, and this isn't far from where that big giant elk carcass was at. Something had gone down there and picked up a big old chunk of agate, which a lot of this agate is really similar to obsidian, and had shattered it. And that's really hard to do because agate is very dense. It's almost like it's the density of a diamond. These agates are super hard to cut. That's what makes them beautiful when you polish them and mess with them. Well, something had broke this thing apart, and it looked like straight up some kind of amateur hour flint napping had gone on there. Shards and pieces of razor sharp. And I have video of all this too. I even brought a big chunk of it home. It's actually in my hand right now. And it looks like tool making was going on. You know, that looks like something shattered this rock. And what's kind of, you know, ding, ding, ding in my head is, you know, back in the day, the Native Americans, they would fight for certain ground simply because certain rocks were plentiful there that they could make spears and they could make arrows out of, because those certain rocks were super important to them.
Right.
Because that was their hunting. That was everything. And now this canyon system, well, multi-canyon systems, I mean, not only is it habitat is good and there's plenty of food and all that, but it's also just plumb full of these weird rocks that would be great if you ever needed to sharp anything. You don't have to carry it on you. You could just walk down to the creek, take you 10 minutes at best to find the right rock, shatter that thing on another rock, and you got a razor sharp edge in your hand to go, you know, cut meat off of a rib bone or whatever you need to do, you know. And it just, we were just dumbfounded. I'd never even thought about tool making or anything like that. You know, I'd never expected to find anything like that. And obviously I didn't watch them make tools or anything like that, but it was just so unexpected to find this rock that had been shattered and razor sharp shards here and there all scattered about. And
you mentioned at the very beginning, that's why you were in the area to begin with. And you've mentioned, you know, these agates and crystals and everything being in this area pretty plentifully, and finding the one sitting on top of the log or whatever. So I was going to ask you, you know, like, do you think maybe they're in that area because of the rocks that are in that area? And apparently you just answered that question.
It's funny that you thought to ask that, because my friend, one of my best friends, his name's Joe. He's the one that originally turned me on to this area because he's a rock hound madman, you know, and he knew that there's really good rock hunting up there. And so he was the one that first showed me that area, which brought me into that area. And he's always said that he thinks, because now he's real big into Sasquatch because of everything I've been doing. He goes up with me, does missions with me and stuff. And he's always said that he thinks that all of the amethyst and all of these crazy crystals and crazy agates and all this rock has something to do with the Sasquatch. He's always, you know, felt that. And I've always just kind of dismissed it because I know he's a rock nut and just, yeah, you and your rocks, everything's about your rocks. But now that I found this shattered agate in right there in Dead Canyon, I definitely have to at least accept that it's possible, you know, that yes, these rocks are a part of their attraction to this area. And the amount of sign in this area, man, it's like, I went out with a guy in the Columbia River Gorge about a month ago. He took me up into his location to look for Sasquatch and set up his audio stuff. And, you know, we were looking at some tree breaks and some things, and he's getting excited about these things, you know, and I'm getting excited too. But in reality, in my research area, I wouldn't have even stopped and turned my camera on for anything that we were finding up at his location. But it's just because there's 10 times, 100 times more sign, more compelling sign. And it just, I mean, it's just insane how much stuff there is. Like, my buddy just came from Mexico, and you know, he knew that we were going to find sign. He'd watched enough of my channel. He knew that we were going to see some cool stuff. But he was overwhelmed by what we were finding and how much of it, just everywhere we went. Look, another tree impaled in the ground, or, you know, here's the structure, or, you know, oh, and a footprint. I forgot. I found a lot of footprints. I think I told you about one, but on this last trip, my buddy Colin, on our last morning there, I come out of the tent, I'm making coffee, and he's like, you got to come see this. And I'm just like, dude, I'm making coffee, you know, leave me alone. He's like, no, you got to come see this. And sure enough, right next to my truck, right in the gravel, because we're camping on gravel, but it has this moss layer because nobody's driven in there in decades until I cut in the trail to get us in there. Right next to my truck is a big old footprint with, clear toe marks and everything. And he did. He put a big old puddle of plaster over it. But we had to leave. I was like, we can't wait for this. We have to go because we're on a time crunch. And so I just left the plaster there. I'm sure it's just going to get ruined in the weather, but we tarped it off. We did what we could. But that was right there. That had to have happened on our last night, and it was right next to the truck, just feet from where we were sleeping. This type of stuff is constant, man. And I'm running through my head because I know I'm forgetting all kinds of stuff, all kinds of incidences and things like that. But there's just so much going on up there. The area is just amazing. You couldn't ask for more as a Sasquatch researcher, because everything I'm telling you, that's all basically in my first year of doing this. And I found a juvenile footprint in the sand along the river that was really cool. That was the first time I'd ever found like a little kid-sized footprint. And that was just amazing. And then after that, my buddy Joe actually found the next one. And so I do know that there's juveniles in there as well, which is obviously to be expected. If there's big ones, there'll be little ones.
Yeah, this is crazy that all this has happened in such a short amount of time. But
I know.
I think it's just a matter of you basically stumbled into an extremely active area where they haven't, really been messed with. They've got everything they need. And that's some pretty crazy stuff. I've looked at your YouTube channel a little bit. We talked before, you're going to come back on. We'll deep dive more into everything.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
But once again, tell everybody where they can find your stuff and how to reach you.
Yeah, Northwest Yeti Quest, just NWYETIQUEST. I'm Hugh Knight. Yeah, it's pretty much, if you want to communicate with me at all, you just shoot me a message on any video. I read my comments and I engage with anybody, and I'll get you an email. I'm pretty good about staying on top of responding to my comments and stuff. My channel's pretty young. It's only really been up for 7 or maybe 8 months, but the first couple of months I wasn't doing anything with it. So really the channel's only been active for about 6 months. So it's not like I have some insane following where I can't respond to comments and stuff.
But no, man, I mean, you're doing the right thing. You're just learning and putting this stuff out there as you go along. And I think you've made great strides so far. The grub and insect farming theory that you came up with, I have never heard that before, but it makes perfect sense.
I'm working on a video right now to prove it, to illustrate it, because I am so convinced that's what's going on. And to go back to my upside down tree site, the original one, there's a bunch of holes in the ground where upside down trees used to be. In fact, while I'm making my upside down tree video on my channel, I step in one and almost hurt myself. They're all over. So, and now all across my research areas, all these brand new ones that weren't there, the other times I was up. So, I mean, for me, it's obvious. That has to be why they're doing it, and everything comes down to food. Everybody wants these trees to be they're a grave marker or, whatever. I've heard every theory anybody can come up with. Food makes way more sense, and going back to my very first sighting, that Sasquatch was at that stump for over an hour, just sitting there at the stump. I couldn't tell what it was doing. It was too far away, and I have videos that show massive digging and shredding of stumps all over the place. So I know that the grubs are important to them. And now I'm just beyond convinced that that's what these are for. It's the only thing that makes sense. And a lot of these are small sticks that they just stab into the ground. And, I would suspect that was probably a juvenile, watching the big ones do it or something. And so he stabs a stick into the ground, but all different sizes. And all these new discoveries aren't on my channel yet, but they will be.
Like you were talking about, the tops of trees are extremely limber. They're not easy to break.
Yeah.
And then, like, okay, just because it breaks, does it, like, naturally, it doesn't always break cleanly. Sometimes it's still hanging on. So then it has to kind of rot away before it falls. Most of the time, a treetop doesn't even hit the ground. It just gets caught up in the tree limbs and never comes down.
Yeah.
If it does come down, it's not going to be coming down with enough force to stab itself into the ground. So like something is putting these things there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question about that. It's difficult. Like a human's not going to be able to do it. That's not an easy thing to do. Not without equipment, at least.
No, I mean, we talk about that in the last video. If we wanted to replicate this, because I even have footage of us attempting to stab them into the ground with our strength. We just can't do it. I mean, it just won't break through the mud and the leaves and all that. And so the only way we could create these would be with post hole diggers and shovels. And, it'd be so much work. But you can see in the video that all of the surrounding ground, you can see it's undisturbed. It's the same pine needles and leaves. They're all connected to each other. And so however they're doing this, it happens in an instant. They're just, I assume they just pick them up and just pierce them into the ground. But even that, it just seems impossible, even with all the strength in the world. It just, like, how do you drive a freaking log into the ground like that? But yet there they are all over the place. So they're doing it. Just doesn't make sense. There's so much just crazy, bizarre stuff surrounding these things.
That's a big part of it. A lot of it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And that's why it's so hard to convince, a non-believer to accept all this stuff. It's easier when you just, they're just big apes, but there's so much more than that. I don't know what they are, but there's I don't know, just a crazy mystery I'm trying to figure out.
If you've had your own run-in with Sasquatch or something else you can't explain and you'd like to talk about it on the podcast, email me at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. Check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. You can find links to social media, past episodes, merchandise, everything you need all in one place. And until next time, remember, there's something in the woods.